Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty foundational, looking at source material that honestly turns one of history's most famous promises right on its head. We're talking about the promised land, Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey.
Right. And for centuries, that phrase, milk and honey, it's basically been code for, well, a divine handout, like guaranteed prosperity, easy living.
Yeah, a reward. Simple as that.
Exactly. But the sources we're digging into today, they come from some really deep work in biblical humanities, historical context, and they paint a radically different picture. They argue pretty forcefully that this whole interpretation, it's fundamentally flawed. The land wasn't a blessing of ease. It was actually the setting for a massive challenge, really demanding contract.
A challenge. So not a prize, but a task.
A task and maybe the stage for a world-altering social experiment. That's where these sources take us.
Okay, that's a big shift. So we're moving away from just thinking about personal belief, individual spirituality.
Way beyond that, we're grounding this firmly in history, in governance. The sources draw this incredibly tight line, an unbreakable link between the ancient contract, the covenant, the actual physical territory of Canaan.
Okay, so if we're setting the stage here, what's our main goal? What's the key takeaway we need right up front?
The absolute core mission for us today is to get past this idea of simple real estate. It's not about God handing over a property deed.
Right, not just buying a house.
Not at all. It was a mandate. It was about delegated authority. The big insight from all this material is that God wasn't giving out, a nice piece of land for a vacation. God was delegating the actual power, the fundamental authority, to govern a specific place. And not just govern, but to implement a completely different kind of social and economic system there.
Wow, okay. Delegated governance. Just phrasing it that way. It changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does. The whole story shifts.
All right, let's dive into that first section then. The land as the stage for this divine governance.
Perfect. So when you really scrutinize the covenant relationship in the ancient texts, yeah, God promises land quite often. It's a recurring theme.
Mm-hmm. Abraham, Moses.
Right. But the sources really hammer this point.
Mm.
We absolutely have to treat this promise like a governmental transfer with that kind of gravity, not just a material gift like getting a new chariot or something. The land isn't just stuff to be owned.
Okay, but why is that specific distinction, ownership versus governance, why is that so critical? What hinges on that?
Well, it defines the entire purpose of the covenant people in the world.
Yeah.
See, if it was just about ownership, what would the focus be?
Keeping it, building fences, maybe getting wealthy within your borders.
Exactly. Private wealth, borders, personal success inside those lines.
Hmm.
But the source material brings up this really powerful concept, deputy rule.
Or deputy rule, okay.
The idea is God's ultimate aim, according to these texts, is to govern the entire world with justice, with equality. But, and this is key, not through direct divine zapping from the sky.
Right, not micromanaging everything personally.
No. Instead, this governance, this just rule, is meant to be realized through a proxy, through the covenant people. They become the deputies, tasked with embodying that just rule in the real world.
So they're getting a governorship, an operational license maybe, to run this specific region based on God's principles.
That's a great way to put it, an operational license. And think about it, to make that deputy rule real, to make sure the governance isn't just, a nice idea in people's head.
It has to be concrete, public, societal.
Precisely. You can't have an abstract covenant achieve that. You need a physical place.
Yeah.
A legal system needs a jurisdiction.
Right.
A social system needs actual people living together somewhere. So the land becomes the non-negotiable stage. It's the physical venue where this governance has to happen, where it has to be made real.
Okay, I'm seeing the structure now. If there's supposed to be this proxy government, the land isn't just land anymore. It's the laboratory. It's where they build the whole system. Laws, courts, everything.
Exactly. And the sources really emphasize this. The second that land is delegated, every single law that follows, it stops being just abstract morality.
What do you mean?
Well, think about laws on how you measure property, or how you settle arguments, or how you organize public services. Suddenly, those aren't just ethical guidelines anymore. They become actual statecraft, practical governance.
Ah, okay. Like setting up courts?
Perfect example.
Huh.
The sources point out things like establishing a fair court system, setting up courts of appeal, even using the city gates as public places for justice. You can only do that if you actually possess the land. You need territorial control to make laws stick, to make them binding for everyone living there.
So getting the land is the moment the whole thing clicks into reality. It moves the covenant from just philosophy or, personal belief into a working geopolitical fact. The promise becomes, okay, you guys are going to build a model society, a functioning one right here on this ground.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
Which makes the territory itself this huge, huge undertaking. It wasn't, here's a place to relax. It was, here's the difficult job of building a nation state from the ground up based on these really radical, equitable laws. Their assignment was to prove that God's way, God's justice, could actually work in the messy material world.
Yeah.
And the land, that's the lab bench where they had to build it.
This whole idea of building a model society, this governance mandate, it connects directly to that word you always hear associated with the land, holiness.
Absolutely. And that's the next big area these sources just completely redefine.
Because usually when we think holy, we think, I don't know, monks in a monastery, personal piety, being morally perfect.
Right. That very narrow, very individualistic view.
Yeah.
Focused inward, perfecting your own soul, maybe staying away from worldly things.
Yeah.
And the source material basically says, look, that view, it totally misses the gigantic social demand buried in that core instruction, from Leviticus. Be holy because I am holy. I mean, think about it. If that command just meant be morally perfect, well, first, who could actually do that? It's impossible. And second, how does that connect to the very practical, very worldly job of governing a nation that they were just given?
Right. It seems disconnected from the land mandate we were just talking about. So what is the source's definition? You said it was revolutionary.
It is. It's fundamentally social. It's economic. It's communal. Holiness, according to this analysis, isn't primarily about your inner state. It's defined as a social condition.
A social condition.
Yes, specifically a social reality where there is no disparity, no significant gap in status or wealth or position between people in the community.
Wait, no disparity as in
Equality.
deep equality. A state where the very structures of society ensure everyone is treated equitably, where resources are shared fairly, without discrimination, where the collective well-being, the health of the whole community comes first. Wow. Okay. If that's holiness, then the command be holy isn't some checklist for personal virtue. It's a direct order to build that specific kind of society, a just, equitable social structure. That's a massive shift.
It connects God's own nature, holiness, directly to the act of governing. Why is God holy? Because God, in this view, operates without favoritism, aiming for perfect justice and equality for everyone. So the deputies, the covenant people, their job is to make their community reflect that divine character through actual laws, actual structure.
And we see that in the laws they were given, the practical stuff.
Absolutely. This is where the argument gets really concrete. The sources point to specific, incredibly radical economic policies mandated for when they control the land, policies designed precisely to prevent disparity.
Okay, give us the big ones. What are we talking about?
Well, the most famous is probably the Jubilee system. You know this one.
Vaguely. Every 50 years, something resets.
Exactly. Every 50 years, all land has to go back to its original tribal or family owners. Think about that. Land was the main source of wealth and power back then.
Right. Agriculture, status.
Everything. So this law made it structurally impossible for land, and therefore power, to be permanently bought up and concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families over generations. It builds in a reset. It ensures future generations always have a chance, prevents a permanent underclass from forming. That's holiness, enacted through economic policy.
That's incredible. It actively fights against long-term inequality becoming entrenched. Hard to imagine a system more designed to counter that.
It is radical. And then you have things like the gleaning laws.
Gleaning, like picking up leftovers.
Kind of, but it was law, not charity. Farmers were explicitly commanded not to harvest their fields right to the very edge. The corners, the bits that dropped, they had to be left.
Not for whom?
For the poor, for the resident alien, the immigrant, or a refugee, for anyone marginalized. They had the legal right to come and gather that food freely. It wasn't about the farmer feeling generous. It was a built-in resource-sharing mechanism. Part of the economic fabric, ensuring basic food and dignity for everyone, regardless of their social standing.
So when they talk about the Holy Land, it's not because the dirt itself is magic or has some mystical vibe.
Exactly. According to these sources, it's holy because it's the specific place where the people have this immense responsibility, this mission, the mission to actually create that perfectly equal, non-disparate society by putting these radical laws into practice.
The land is the stage, the laws are the script, and holiness is the condition they have to achieve through action.
That's the core of it. And to really drive home why this social dimension is crucial, The sources use that historical comparison you mentioned earlier.
Ah, the monks. Right.
Yeah. Think about medieval Europe, high feudalism. You had monks, nuns, ascetics. Many were incredibly devout, truly dedicated to intense personal holiness, spiritual discipline, prayer, really sincere individuals.
Mm-hmm. Deeply pious people.
Absolutely. But their intense individual piety existed right alongside and often didn't challenge horrific systemic social evils. Feudalism, serfdom, kings claiming divine right, crushing poverty for most people, constant warfare.
So the individual holiness didn't touch the unjust structures of society.
Not in a transformative way, no. The source material argues that this demonstrates the flaw in a purely individualistic approach. Personal spiritual perfection, even if achieved, can't fulfill the biblical mandate if it ignores the command to actively dismantle systems of disparity.
Ah,
Real scriptural holiness, they argue, must include the social, the communal, the structural dimension. It demands action in the world.
okay, that clarifies the mandate, build this incredibly just, equal society, which leads us straight into this huge paradox you mentioned earlier,
Right.
because the task is enormous, almost utopian, create perfect equality. But then we look at the actual place, Canaan, and we run smack into that phrase, flowing with milk and honey, which sounds like, well, paradise found. Easy street.
And this is where the sources just bring down the hammer on that romanticized image.
Mm.
They lay out the geographical and historical reality of Canaan, and it is brutally, dramatically different from a lush paradise.
Okay, let's get specific. What was it actually like?
First, scale. It was tiny, really small. Some sources compare it to, say, just one province in modern South Korea, like Gangwon-do. A sliver of land.
Small. And the terrain?
Mostly awful for farming. Large parts were rugged mountains, rocky hills, arid desert, wilderness. Very, very little land was actually suitable for reliable, large-scale agriculture.
Okay, so if it's small and not very fertile, you can't easily feed a lot of people. You certainly can't build up a big surplus to support, complex government and social programs.
Exactly right. The sources are pretty blunt. Achieving food self-sufficiency in that region was incredibly difficult, maybe impossible most years. Rainfall was unpredictable, the soil was marginal, survival itself was often precarious.
So the idea that it was just naturally overflowing with abundance, that doesn't fit the geography?
Not at all. If milk and honey means easy, natural prosperity, Canaan was basically the opposite of that, at least as a starting point.
And, okay, scarcity. That usually breeds conflict, right? If the land is poor, people must have been fighting over the good spots constantly.
Constantly. The sources point to chronic raiding, warfare, skirmishes being just, normal life in that region, largely because of the scarcity. The land was small, hemmed in, and it wasn't empty. It was already populated by several groups. The texts mention 7 main tribes, remember?
Crowded and poor?
Yeah, all competing fiercely for the limited water, the few decent patches of farmland. It was already a pressure cooker long before the Israelites arrived.
Okay, so internal conflict was bad enough. But then there's the bigger picture, the geopolitics. That's where it becomes, as you said, a potential death trap.
Oh, absolutely. Geopolitically, Canaan was in possibly the worst strategic location you could imagine in the ancient world. It was the permanent, constantly fought-over buffer zone
Buffer between who?
between the two ancient world superpowers.
Yeah.
The huge, sophisticated empires of Mesopotamia, think Hittites, Assyrians, Babylonians to the north and east,
Okay.
and the other giant, Egypt, to the south. Canaan sat right in the middle, the land bridge connecting them.
The highway for armies? The invasion route?
Exactly. If you were a major power back then, and you wanted to expand your empire, or even just feel secure, you had to control Canaan. It commanded the trade routes, the strategic mountain passes. So what happened?
Constant interference?
Invasion.
Perpetual. The superpowers were always marking through, fighting each other there, taxing the locals, installing puppet rulers, demanding tribute. Egyptian records, Assyrian records, they're full of campaigns in Canaan. It was necessary for their security and ambition, which meant perpetual instability for anyone living there. The place was unstable by global design.
And that wasn't just a temporary problem for one century.
Not at all. It was the fundamental reality for millennia. Even when those specific empires faded, the problem didn't go away. New powers rose: Persia, Greece under Alexander and his successors, eventually Rome.
And they all saw Canaan the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a vital strategic linchpin. Controlling it was key to controlling the Eastern Mediterranean and projecting power. So the pressure, the conflict, the external interference, it just continued relentlessly. That kind of constant existential threat, it must have shaped everything about life there. How did people even cope day to day? They must have been obsessed with just surviving with defense.
Completely. They lived in a state of, well, high alert, you could say,
Yeah.
the main response. Massive fortification. People didn't live in scattered farmhouses. They built these incredibly strong, high-walled settlements, often right on top of steep, hard-to-reach mountains, stone fortresses, basically,
The defense
against everyone, against raiders from the desert, against neighboring city-states fighting over water, and especially against the armies of the big empire sweeping through. And farming itself, already risky because of the poor land and fickle rain. It was made 10 times more dangerous by the constant threat of attack.
So you couldn't just leave your crops out in the field.
No way. You harvested quickly, in season, and immediately hauled everything inside those fortified city walls for safety. Your food supply was always vulnerable.
You know, that suddenly makes sense of that story when the spies go into Canaan before the invasion and they come back terrified.
Yes. The report they give.
You say the inhabitants are like giants and their cities have walls reaching up to the sky. I always thought that sounded like exaggeration, like they were just scared.
Well, they probably were scared, but the sources suggest their report was actually pretty accurate. They were describing a population that had to be strong, that had to build incredibly formidable defenses, these huge walls, just to survive day to day. It wasn't hyperbole. It was a realistic description of life in a place designed for maximum struggle. Canaan was the polar opposite of an easy, welcoming gift.
Okay, so that brings us right back to the core paradox, the big question. If the goal is to build this model society of perfect justice and equality, why on earth would God choose this place? The smallest, poorest, most fought over, most strategically nightmarish, hardest to farm piece of land in the entire region. Why not pick somewhere, easier, like Egypt's Nile Delta, fertile, defensible?
And this, right here, is where the source material delivers its most stunning argument. Its great reversal.
Okay, I'm ready.
The argument is, giving the covenant people the most difficult, most problematic, the most contested land on earth.
Yeah.
That is precisely the proof of a true God. A God who operates by justice, not by playing favorites or offering cheap shortcuts.
The difficulty itself is the proof. That needs unpacking. How does that work?
To get it, we have to zoom out again and remember the ultimate scope of the covenant's purpose. It was never just about making one small nation comfortable or successful.
Right, you said earlier, it's about the whole world.
Exactly. The focus is the salvation of the entire world.
Right.
But again, we have to understand what salvation means in this context, according to these sources. It's not just about, getting your individual soul into heaven after you die.
Okay. It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. It's a large-scale, public, social, even cosmic concept. Salvation here means reversing the whole system, the whole reign of sin, injustice, oppression, violence that dominates the world, and replacing it with God's rule, God's kingdom of justice and peace.
That sounds like the Lord's Prayer, doesn't it? Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Precisely. The demonstration, the transformation has to happen here, on earth, in the grit and mess of human history and politics.
Okay, so if the goal is that massive cosmic transformation, fixing the broken systems of the world, then the strategy has to match the goal.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to Canaan's difficulty. And you mentioned an analogy, the disaster site.
Yes, that analogy becomes really clear now. Think about it. If you're putting together the world's best, most specialized rescue team, paramedics, engineers, crisis managers, where do you send them?
Not to the safest, calmest place.
Right. You don't send them to a peaceful resort where everything's fine. You send them straight into the heart of the disaster. The earthquake zone, the flood zone, the place where the suffering is worse, where the systems have collapsed, where the negative forces are most concentrated.
Because that's where the help is needed most. That's where they can make the biggest difference.
Exactly. So the Canaan mission, viewed this way, it wasn't a graduation party. It was an urgent deployment to ground zero.
Ground zero for
the world's problems. Canaan, because of its geography and geopolitics, was the place where all the deepest issues were concentrated and intensified. Resource scarcity, which breeds conflict, constant war fueled by imperial ambitions, the resulting poverty and social injustice. It was a microcosm of everything wrong with the world.
So God sent them there specifically because it was so bad.
Yes, to fight those existing systems of oppression, scarcity, and violence head-on, to demonstrate right there in the toughest place imaginable that the divine way, the way of justice, equality, shared resources, peace could actually work, could succeed even under the absolute worst conditions.
So if they could pull it off there, They could actually build that society with no disparity, implement the Jubilee, the gleaning laws, protect the vulnerable right there in that pressure cooker.
Then it proves the system isn't just a nice idea. It proves it's universally viable. It provides the ultimate precedent. If it can work in Canaan, it can work anywhere. It becomes the model for transforming the whole world.
And that then finally explains milk and honey.
Finally.
Mm-hmm.
The source material is absolutely emphatic on this.
Right.
That phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey, it is not describing the land as they found it. It's not about the initial conditions.
It's the goal, the outcome.
It's the final outcome. It's the promise, the vision of what that harsh, broken, war-torn land will become if the covenant people do the incredibly hard work. If they struggle, sweat, build, and live out that difficult social mandate of holiness, of creating perfect equity. Milk and honey is the society they have to build, not the free gift they receive passively.
That changes. Well, it changes everything about how you read those stories. It's the destination they have to fight towards, not the starting point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And understanding that massive shift from land as an easy gift to land as the site of a demanding social struggle, well, it has some really profound and, frankly, quite challenging things to say about how we think about faith today.
Right. Which leads us to the critique section. The sources aren't just historical. They apply this understanding to contemporary practices.
They do. And they are unsparingly critical of religious approaches that have, in their view, completely missed this core social mandate.
And the main target seems to be that individualized type of faith, the kind often called the prosperity gospel, or maybe just a focus on personal blessing.
Yes, that's the central focus of the critique, a religious practice that becomes almost entirely about securing your own personal well-being.
Like what, specifically?
Things like focusing prayer and faith primarily on achieving individual health, getting wealth, career success, maybe getting your kids into good colleges, and of course, guaranteeing your personal ticket to heaven after you die. That whole package.
Okay. And the language the sources use about that kind of focus, it's not gentle, is it?
No, it's exceptionally strong. They don't just say it's, maybe a bit shallow or misguided. They use words like superstition, fanaticism. And the strongest term they use is that this kind of faith is actively blasphemous, that it mocks God.
Whoa. Blasphemy. Mocking God. Just for wanting, say, health or success. That sounds incredibly severe. What's the reasoning behind such harsh condemnation?
It loops all the way back to the nature and purpose of God we discussed. If God, according to the core covenant, is fundamentally concerned with liberating the entire world from huge systemic problems, inequality, poverty, injustice, war.
The big picture stuff.
Right. And the mandate given at Canaan was to tackle those issues head-on at ground zero. Then, a faith practice that essentially ignores all of that massive world-changing struggle in favor of just boosting your own personal comfort and success. Well, from the perspective of these sources, that's seen as a fundamental betrayal of the entire mission.
So it's not that wanting a good life is bad in itself. It's the prioritization. It's using a system designed for global repair just for personal gain.
That seems to be the core of the critique. The sources call this intense focus on the individual cheap comfort.
Cheap comfort.
Yeah, meaning it might make you feel better personally, but it distracts you, and maybe society, from the much deeper, harder, more fundamental problems of the world. It distracts from the actual mission they believe people were given. It essentially reduces this grand, cosmic struggle for justice down to a kind of personal self-help program.
And that diverts energy, resources, focus away from the collective mandate.
That's the argument. Which means the biggest distortion, then, is how Scripture itself gets used. If the Bible, as these sources see it, is this incredible document full of wisdom and strategy for deep societal change, like a blueprint for building a just world,
And just using it like a manual for personal blessing or getting rich.
is seen as a profound misreading, a betrayal of the text's core purpose, a reduction of its power.
It's like having the plans for a hospital and only using them to build yourself a bigger house.
That's a good analogy. And the sources point out, quite sadly, that this isn't a new problem. Historically, they argue, both ancient Israel and later institutions like the church have often fallen into this trap. They've missed the crucial social mission, focusing inward, seeking safety and institutional success, instead of embracing the difficult, outward-focused task of transformation. They use strong language, saying these groups have too often walked the wrong path, choosing the easier road of individual or institutional gain over the hard, demanding fight for communal justice mandated in the covenant.
Mistaking personal or group success for the actual cosmic mission. That's a powerful diagnosis.
It is, and it leaves us with a lot to think about.
Absolutely. What an incredible journey this deep dive has been. We started with milk and honey meaning easy street,
Right, a simple gift.
and we've ended up seeing Canaan as anything but. As this mandate, this incredibly difficult assignment for immense social struggle and transformation, the task, turn the hardest, most contested place on earth into the most ideal, equitable society imaginable.
That synthesis, that complete reversal, it brings us right to the edge of the next absolutely critical question. It's a question the sources we looked at today clearly set up, but they don't fully answer it in this material.
What's this?
We now have a much clearer picture of what the mission was. Create this society completely free of disparity and do it in the toughest environment possible as a model for the world.
Okay, but how?
The practicalities, the method.
Exactly. How specifically were the covenant people supposed to actually engineer this radical social transformation? How do you build that kind of society, especially under such intense pressure? We saw some hints, didn't we? Those economic laws,
Yeah.
the Jubilee cycle, debt release, the gleaning laws, those sound like concrete strategies.
They do, and that suggests the how isn't missing. If the Bible really is, as these sources propose, a kind of strategy manual, a guide for confronting and fixing the world's deepest injustices and contradictions,
Okay.
then the specific methods, the detailed plans, they must be in there somewhere.
Maybe hidden or overlooked because people haven't been reading it that way?
Perhaps masked by centuries of interpretation focused primarily on individual piety or personal salvation after death. So that leaves us, and you listening, with a really provocative closing thought.
What is?
What if we consciously stopped reading these ancient texts only for personal comfort, or guidance for our individual lives, or guarantees about the afterlife? What if instead we started reading them as a comprehensive guidebook for engineering systemic justice, as a radical blueprint for enacting that deputy rule on Earth?
Reading it as a plan for societal change.
Yes. What specific wisdom, what forgotten techniques, what practical, concrete solutions for building equitable systems might we uncover hidden in plain sight? Solutions that could apply directly to the huge political, economic, and social messes we face in our own complex, competitive, often unjust world today.
Finding ancient answers for modern problems. That possibility. Well, that's where the deep dive has to continue.